Hey everyone, welcome back to Pro AV today. Look, I'm really excited. I got a chance to speak on the Hidden Gems panel at InfoComm a few weeks ago, and one company really stood out, a company called Modus VR, which I had a chance to talk about on stage. And I said, you know what? I got to get these guys on the show. They are changing the way that AV design is done from the ground up. So I said, why not go straight to the source? I brought one of the co-founders on, Ken Brueck. Ken, thanks so much for coming on Pro AV today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Look, Ken, the work that you guys are doing right now is revolutionary for a number of different verticals inside AV because it literally is changing the game for how people are designing. But what initially sparked that interest and that desire to start a company like Modus?
It comes from suffering as a client and being a bad client. So we actually got our start on the Resi side. I was working with a good buddy of mine who's an integrator, having him put in a home theater for me. And the whole process, I knew just enough to be a pain, but I didn't know enough to really understand everything that he was recommending. And so, back and forth, weeks and weeks in the design process. Long story short, he was telling me to put the whole system on one wall, and I just couldn't get behind that idea. And I said, no, we got to put it on this wall because I'm the client. I know how I am going to use this with my family. And so eventually he said, all right, well, you're the client. We'll do what you want. They put it in. It's awesome. But he was right. I should have done it the other way. And I'm a software guy. I've also got a lot of background in 3D. And the whole time I just kept having this recurring thought, why hasn't software solved this problem? And why does he not have better tools for communicating his vision? And so I actually kind of went back to some of my more traditional 3D modeling tools and started modeling out my basement and the whole home theater. And it hit me. I was like, okay, well, yeah, not everybody has 2 months to spend modeling this stuff out. The tools that exist are just too slow. And that was right around the same time that VR was kind of coming back into the limelight a little bit. And I had been dabbling with that. And I thought, this interesting new tech is far more than just a gaming and entertainment platform. This can solve some real problems. And hey, I just have some really fresh pain here after having gone through this. I think there's something to this. And that's where we got started, is just trying to help those guys that are putting in projects, high dollar per square foot projects with a lot of technical details, helping them communicate that vision to their clients, technical or not.
Well, Ken, I am up front with you here. I'm not the world's biggest fan of VR, and I don't pretend to be, but I had a chance to demo this at InfoComm, and I could tell you this. That is the absolute best case for VR I've ever seen, right? I'm a hater. I am a hater, but I loved the Modus tool, right? Because what it does is it allows you, well, I'll say this, it brings the creativity back to design, right? In real time, you're able to see and resize things and see from the perspective of some of the end users. Talk about an integrator and designer perspective. You mentioned having some of those experiences in the past with being maybe a bad client. Talk about how the integrators and the design partners that we're using now can utilize a tool like this.
Yeah, well, so when we talk about creativity in particular, high cost of change is the enemy of creativity, right? When you are brainstorming, there's that common saying where there's no bad ideas, you're just tossing it out there. But if every idea takes you days or even a week or two to see to its end, you're going to start really pumping the brakes anytime you're thinking out of the box. Whereas the inverse of that is much more like a whiteboard environment, right? Where when you're just sketching stuff out and, oh yeah, that was bad. Let me erase that really quick and try something different. When you can get that momentum in the design process, it frees up your creativity to do new things. And so from an integrator's perspective, how they're using Modus is very similar to how you would use a whiteboard, both in terms of the speed and creativity, but also in terms of where that tool comes in during the design process. So typical, more traditional renders take so long to create. I mean, even if you're sending it overseas overnight, that's a whole day turnaround. And so because that cost of change is so high, you're going to push back how, as far back in the process as you can to bring in renders, if you bring them in at all, because you just can't afford to do 20 revisions. You just don't have the time. Whereas Modus is meant to be so fast that you can do all these changes in real time with the clients participating, and it changes the entire discussion. But on top of it being a whiteboard-like experience, we also get the benefits of renders. Everybody can see what they're going to get. You're getting that dimensional accuracy. If this table fits in Modus, that it's going to fit in real life. And so for someone to say, hey, what if we tried a trapezoid table here? And maybe somebody else in the room is just absolutely opposed to that idea. You can still try it in 30 seconds. And maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. But now everybody's on the same page about it. Nobody's having to rely on their imagination. And so the net result is, for the integrator and the client, fewer meetings. They're getting greater stakeholder alignment up front, much faster. Everybody's on the same page. There's greater confidence in the solution moving forward. And then you have more time for the install, right? Because your delivery date rarely gets pushed back, right? As your meetings go on, it just shrinks the time you have to do install and troubleshooting and polish and training. So basically, we're just letting the integrator get a lot of that time back.
What was, I think, probably one of the really, well, if not the most exciting, one of the most exciting things was it actually gave the client, or gives the client, an opportunity to collaborate in real time, right? I remember the days building studios and building control rooms where, the manufacturer would roll up and roll out your blueprint, and that's what it was. But now you have the ability, and this is something kind of that you guys rolled out a little bit at the show with Modus as a service, but there's real-time collaboration happening where it used to be gate kept, right? It's now something that has been design has been democratized, really.
Absolutely.
With the use of the tool.
Yeah. Well, and really, if you think about it, it's been an uneven playing field, right? Because you'll have the experts come in and they have years of experience of doing these things over and over and over. They can look at a blueprint, and for them, they may as well be standing in the space because it just makes sense to them. It's intuitive at that point. And same thing with all the technology they're putting in the room. They just get it. And when they look at a spec about field of view, pickup patterns, whatever the case may be, it all makes perfect sense to them. But for your average client, your average stakeholder, they are trying to translate every detail to the best of their ability. It's a mental obstacle course for them. It's exhausting. They can't keep up with the conversation, and it's an uneven playing field. It's just a disadvantage for them. And so when you can visualize those things, you're removing a lot of that exhaustion. And what you're doing is you're elevating the client so that now they're in a position where they're on the same level as the people that are more technical, that are more experienced. And so now finally the stakeholders can make decisions quickly and in an informed way, and they're going to be a better client because of it. Everybody's going to be happier.
Well, and they're going to be a more informed client, right? Especially as we have conversations in AV every day around equity and compliance. Now, literally, in many cases, the end user is able to have the exact perspective of what they'll be able to see, how the TV is going to look on the screen. You'll be able to see audio pickup patterns, which is unheard of, but also waveforms, right? So you want to make sure there's equal coverage. And as we're having these conversations about compliance and equity, how does a tool like Modus empower the client and the integrator to better serve those communities?
Yeah, well, it's equity at every stage, right? I mean, at InfoComm, we were hearing a lot about equity in terms of the meeting experience. Are all of the meeting participants having an equitable experience, which is huge, but also in the design process, it needs to be equitable as well. And so, just a very simple use case is, do we want the camera below or above the screen, right? It's conceptually very simple. But when we start talking about larger and larger screens, all of a sudden the delta between having the camera above or below the screen is significant. And the chain reaction there is also significant. And so we have our stakeholders that are being presented with decisions that are more difficult and more pressing than they've ever been before. they're having to imagine using spaces differently than what they've been used to over the last 20 or 30 years. That's hard. And now, especially where we have all of our, return to work and all of those catchphrases coming into play, we're all of these companies are trying to find ways to entice their employees to come back to the office, because having an internet connection and a desk isn't enough. Everybody has that at home. And so we now need to say, okay, well, you need to have a good experience in the office. The people that still can't make it to the office need to have a good experience. How are we going to do that? How are we going to paint that picture for everybody? And so one of the more intriguing things that I've been hearing a lot about, of course, is Microsoft Teams Front Row. Very different way of thinking about a meeting, very equitable experience, right? Everyone has much better line of sight to each other. The odds of somebody standing in front of the screen or having their chair wheel them in front of the screen is much lower. But it's such an out of the box thing to rotate your whole conference room 90 degrees. How do we think through that? And so when you can quickly show these things, I was actually on a demo earlier today where just on the fly, we did that. We reoriented the room in response to the question of, well, can this person see the screen from where they are? And in Modus, we showed them really quickly. The answer was no, they could not see the screen, at least unobstructed. And we flipped the room, and that there are some compromises with even Front Row, but to be able to have everybody fully understand those things, right? There's no question about what those compromises might be. It's great for everybody, right? Equitable end to end, all the way from design to the finished solution and your day-to-day meetings.
Well, this is all great in theory, but you're going to have crusty old guys like me. I'm not old. I'm not old, but I'm crusty. That's weird. Who say, you know what? I want to stick to the old way. I want to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm comfortable with it. How do you overcome some of those objections with just that learning curve, right? It's not a system that, you're going to snap your finger and every AV integrator is going to be using, which a lot of them are, admittedly now. But how do you overcome some of those reluctances to try and design in this new way?
The biggest thing is you let the results speak for themselves. And so I've been in software my entire career. I love doing new things. I love solving complex problems in simpler and innovative ways. And there's going to be some people that will just resist change regardless of what it is. And that's fine. We can be patient with them. But really what's going to happen is what we've already seen happening. There's just going to be more of it. The end clients are going to demand more and more to see the end result before the project is done. And that's a pretty reasonable thing, especially younger generations are expecting that more and more. And so the more somebody holds on to the more traditional way of doing things, the harder their life is going to become. So they're going to say, okay, well, maybe previously we weren't doing renders at all. Okay, so now we're going to engage with somebody that can do renders for us. Okay, great. That's a wonderful step in the right direction, right? But then they're going to start to feel the pain of, well, I really want to see a render for this change that we just requested. And I want to see another render for the next revision. And the way that they were doing it before, maybe sending it to a third party, that's probably not going to be quite as fast as they need. And what they're going to see is their competition is starting to embrace more real-time tools. And sooner or later, they're going to be forced to look down a path that's more efficient. And once they dip their toes in the water, they'll like it. But a big response to that question is also why we launched Modus as a service, right? Because it's a very, so for those that aren't familiar, Modus as a service basically lets someone experience all the advantages of Modus without having to use the software themselves, without having to adopt any VR technology. They just engage with our team and we use those tools. And so when they do that, they can participate in the meetings. They're in charge of the flow of the meeting, where the technology goes. And they can see, oh, wow, okay, when we do it this way, it took us a single meeting rather than weeks or even months of back and forth. And I mean, if somebody isn't a believer after that, I don't know what will convince them.
Well, look, it's exciting to be in this space right now, and it's in many cases it may even be difficult to try and project what this looks like in 5-10 years. But if you had a crystal ball in front of you, what are some of the new applications and advancements that you anticipate Modus being a part of in the next 5-10 years?
We're actually doing a lot. It's kind of funny as we're looking forward, we're having to look back. We're spending a lot of R&D on better integrating with the tools like Revit and AutoCAD and SketchUp, just so that we can help people transition to our way of thinking a little bit more. So it's not quite a leap of faith. But beyond that, I mean, we go where our customers take us. And so a lot of the things that are challenges for our integrators and consultants today, I think will continue to be a challenge. But I also think they're having to rethink what they think about workspaces, right? I mean, the table stakes have changed. As we're moving forward, we're seeing a lot more needs, not just to refresh technology every few years, but now it's okay. We need to plan on this space evolving daily, weekly, and in a year from now, this room might be a completely different thing. Some of the trends we're seeing are kind of stepping away from having a few really high-end, high-dollar boardrooms and more towards every single room has technology in it and they're lower cost, right? It's a pretty big flip. And we're seeing people needing to be able to design those spaces faster in more scalable ways. And so I think the trends are all going to be around speed and flexibility and transformation. I love the innovation we're seeing these days with the new technology coming into the office, just in part to entice people to come back, but also just to make things like, the analog whiteboard is slowly dying and it's being replaced by interactive displays and things like that. And it's exciting. I mean, I've worked from home for a decade, but some of this stuff makes me want to go back into an office.
Well, Ken, hey, this is the first of I anticipate a number of times we're going to have you on the show because the tech is constantly changing, which is a good thing. It's a great thing for the industry because innovation keeps us going, right? We're the technology behind the scenes, and you guys are the technology behind the scenes of the technology to the third power. I don't know what I'm saying. Ken, long story short, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate you, and best of luck to you guys coming up here in the next year.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure being here.
And thank you guys for tuning in. Join in next week for another episode of Pro AV Today.